In this second video of our unit about cells, we're going to be learning about what do all cells have in common and then how we can separate them into two categories. So let's begin by looking at what they all have in common. There are two specific things. One of them is all cells contain DNA. Now keep in mind DNA is just simply the genetic makeup is where that's going to be stored here. And then the second thing that all cells contain is a cell membrane. Now these are probably terms you have heard before. The cell membrane is simply going to be the cell is surrounded by a flexible layer. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk tonight. Layer. And so these two things are going to be what all cells contain. Now, if we want to look more at the details, that's where we can separate them into two categories. And so what's going to determine where a cell is categorized is we can either call it a eukaryotic or a eukaryote. That's one category. Or we can also call the other category a prokaryote. And so how we separate is whether one has a nucleus or one does not. And so let's just first look at eukaryotes. You're going to notice that they're much more complicated. Just look at these two diagrams. So they are more complex. And so by more complex, what I'm saying is they have organelles. Now organelles we're going to get into in the next video and the one after that. So we're just looking at specific cell parts when we say organelles. A big characteristic difference is the fact that they do have a nucleus. So nucleus present, as I squeeze that in. And in fact, the DNA is located here. Another characteristic, if you have this type of cell, is if we are looking at, they're going to be much larger in size. There are also going to be many types of these. So there's a large variety of these types of cells. And so a good example of these you could think of are animal cells. Or you could also think of protists. Now protists are an example of like kelp, okay? So that's eukaryotes. You can kind of see here in this diagram that there's a nucleus. We have lots of detail going on. Now, prokaryotes, they do still have that cell membrane. They do have DNA, but their DNA is located in the cytoplasm. Now, if you remember, the cytoplasm is simply just where organelles are contained in. It's space, okay? Sometimes people think of it as like the jelly-like. That's everything is being contained in. So we're talking about all this white space is where the DNA is going to be located at. Now, another thing you may notice between these two pictures is the fact that there is no nucleus. So that's why the DNA is located in the cytoplasm. A third difference is the fact that it is smaller in size. And you may notice that we could actually say it's also less complex. There's not as many organelles. In fact, there's like none. I don't want to say none. I guess none is a bad thing to say. But you'll see there's no endoplasmic reticulum or the Golgi body or the lysosome. We have ribosomes, we have the cytoplasm, and then we have DNA. So very simplistic for prokaryotes. But prokaryotes still can carry out every activity needed for living things. They can still grow these cells. They can still reproduce. They can still respond to the environment. So examples of these type of cells are bacteria. Now I'm going to list more examples here simply because you may not be as familiar with prokaryotes as you are with eukaryotes. We could be thinking of E. coli, staph, so all these types of things that you've heard about, and even cyanobacteria. So these are just simply ways that we can characterize two cells into two separate categories. So if we look at this a little bit more detailed, here are two cells seen underneath a microscope. And so the left one is a eukaryotic. This is actually a plant cell. And so you'll notice a lot more detail, okay? Even though it looks smaller in size, you got to keep in mind this is the microscope, okay? And it was seen on two different microscopes. It was photoshopped. This prokaryote is simply a bacterium. So you're going to notice that you can see more distinctly its pieces. This white area is that cytoplasm that I was talking about. This middle area is all its DNA. Here in the plant, much more complicated, many more things going on. Another example of a prokaryote, you can see here, this is E. coli. You can see how it's very simplistic in shape. Same thing here at this picture, a little bit more zoomed in. You can see the cell wall, you can see the cell membrane, you can see, the cytoplasm, but you don't really see any of these more complex structures that you would find in plant or animal cells. So in this video, all we simply went over was what cells contain and how we can separate them into two categories.